We are joined now here in Brownsville, Texas, by Efrain Olivares. He's the director of Racial and Economic Justice Program at the Texas Civil Rights Project. Also with us, Jonathan Ryan, executive director for the Refugee and Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services, and Ofelia de los Santos, a retired attorney working for the Catholic Diocese of Brownsville as director of Jail, Ministry, and Immigration Services. And Ofelia, that place that they're calling Casa Presidente, you've told me that there's evidence that there are infant babies there because there's evidence of diapers that going in and coming out of the facility.
Correct.
How long have we known that?
That's just been within the last month. After I talked to you, I made another call to a source that we have, and there are 11, más o menos, more or less, 11 babies in Casa Presidente.
And so 11 babies, you also believe that there are young girls?
Yes, there are, because at one time it was all young girls, 15, 16, 17-year-olds. I know that for a fact. And some of them have been moved to make room for the toddlers and babies coming in.
And so now there's a range of girls in age going
Correct.
From infant baby up to
babies,
teenager.
diapered babies.
And is that the only facility that we know about that has girls?
No, the earlier facility, Combs, Esperanza Combs, we went out there and we did an interview with one of our volunteers. That one has babies also.
And what do you think if the First Lady decided to come down here tomorrow to look at that facility, to see how the babies are being treated and how the little girls are being treated? What do you think she would discover if she went in?
I'm not sure, but she can't get in.
Well, I think if the First Lady shows up, she will get in. You can't get in. We can't get in. It seems like no one lower ranking than the President or the First Lady can get in. But I think if she knocked on the door, she might be able to show us what's happening.
I would hope that she would find them in good health.
And Jonathan, this report that we're getting tonight, I'd like to get your reaction to it, that they are talking about 3 facilities for what sounds like infant babies and toddlers.
It's mind-blowing, and I think that the insidious part of this process requires one to take a step back and look not just at the facilities where these children are being held. Many people can walk in and see bright bedspreads, can see an arts and crafts room, and think, okay, this is fine. But what is behind those walls is a large-scale immigration deportation process that's being undertaken against each and every individual one of those children. They are being thrown into immigration court, in many cases with no attorney, and they're asked to plead their cases. We have gone to courts.
Just to stop there for a second, just so the audience understands the scene we're talking about. You're actually talking about a 5-year-old being in one of these judicial proceedings, being asked to represent and answer for himself or herself.
That's exactly right. I myself have sat in court and seen children with their little feet dangling from the respondent's chair, not touching the floor, little glitter shoes, and a dress, and a judge leaning over his bench in order to see her so as to speak with her. All they can discuss is, what is your name? That's a pretty dress. But nevertheless, there is a lot of money being spent by our government in the sole design of deporting each and every one of these children.
Do these judges actually think these are real fact-finding procedures when they've got a 4-year-old sitting in front of them without an attorney?
Well, I don't have to tell you what I think. I know that one immigration judge recently testified that he believed that toddlers as young as 3 or 4 years old who receive these Know Your Rights presentations from groups like RAICES in these shelters are perfectly aware and equipped to follow along the proceedings. It's absolutely absurd. It would be laughable if it wasn't so sad.
And Efrain, the president and his administration are insisting that what they're doing now, that they've only started doing in April, late April and May, they were never doing it before, but they just started doing it. They're insisting that this is the law and they have absolutely no choice. They don't explain why they had a choice before April and why they don't have a choice now. But because they're saying they don't have a choice, they are now talking about building, opening new facilities for infant babies, because they have never had to deal with this number of infant babies before, because this is a new policy.
Right, and it's outrageous that in 2018 in America we're talking about building internment camps, because that's what these are. And when they keep claiming that the law requires the family separation, as you point out, they don't specify what law requires that, because there's absolutely no law that requires that. It's the zero tolerance policy that the executive branch, the Attorney General, could rescind today with the stroke of a pen.
What do you think we should call these places? Because I've been in jails, I've been in prisons, and people want to use a phrase like detention center. There's a kind of, this seems as though the language is being cleansed. When you have cages and when you have locks and the conditions that I'm seeing in here, these are what would be considered jails in any other setting. What would you call them?
I am jail ministry for the Diocese of Brownsville, and I've been assigned to minister to these children. So,
what do you think the right term is for these places?
I think that they're jails. If you're locked in a box and you can't get out, you're in jail. I think that anybody in that situation would feel that way.
But now, when we're seeing these tent facilities, now we're talking about something that actually is different from jail, because it is a lower level, it is less commodious than a jail, for example. There's no possibility of, say, air conditioning or different things that some jails have. And so these things start to look like camps, the kind of camps that live in infamy in our history.
They're internment camps. We saw the images of those 10 cities in Tornillo. Those are internment camps in Tornillo.
Ophelia, the knowledge that the President of the United States could stop all of this tomorrow, is that something that everyone involved in this struggle understands? Is that something that the people, the adults anyway, that are being held under these conditions understand?
oh, absolutely. I heard an interview earlier today on this very channel where the lady says that she would ask Mr. Trump to soften his heart, to start thinking more humanely, that they are human beings. So they understand exactly where it's coming from and who can stop it.
And Jonathan, the president is getting advice from people who've never been to these places, and they are the strongest voices about how to handle this. If you could have a few seconds with the president, what would you tell him?
I would challenge any person to step up and step in to one of these facilities, step into court, and if you dare, try to represent one of these children, one of these families in these cases. It won't just change your mind, it'll change your life to undergo that experience. We work with many pro bonos, and oftentimes those attorneys are conservative Republicans who seek to engage in this work. And many times these are some of the people whose minds are the most blown by these experiences, because they see, for sometimes the first time in their lives, a government that simply doesn't make sense, that appears to be putting cruelty above justice for the mere sake of sending a message of deterrence and a message of diswelcome, not just to these refugees, but to all immigrants, all people of color, all minorities living in this country. Everyone understands this message. It's not a dog whistle, it's a blowhorn.
Ephraim, what does it feel like for you people who've been working on these issues year in and year out, to now have the kind of attention, the country's attention, that the border has not had before?
Well, it's good that we're having this visit so that people who are interested in making the policy decisions can see what is really happening. The congressmen, the senators who were here this week and last week, it's good to have the decision makers here so that they can see it for themselves and not just, be reading about it. But hearing the stories from the parents who have been separated from their children is particularly heart-wrenching. Having to stop the interview halfway through because the mom cannot stop crying, thinking of the prospect of perhaps not seeing her 5-year-old daughter again.
It does seem like what is happening here is finally reaching into the hearts of Americans all over the country. Efrain Olivares, Jonathan Ryan, Ophelia de los Santos, thank you all for starting us off in our discussion tonight. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.